All right. Hello again. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Richard. You did such a great job. I feel like I could almost switch off and get on with some other things. But I couldn't agree with you more. What you did the other evening with those volunteers is basically, what we do. And as you said, it's about getting your hands dirty, frankly, and getting stuck in because it's just such a positive feeling. So before we get into the meat of the chat, quick introduction. Basically, as Richard said, Till the Coast is Clear was formed 5 years ago, would be 5 years old this October. And it was started literally off the back of frustration. I'm a keen outdoorsman, always have been, sea kayaking, swimming, running, all the sort of stuff that most folk do. And but it just astounded me, and it has all of my life, what disregard and disrespect we have for our own home. Supposedly we're the most intelligent creature on the planet, but I genuinely beg to differ. To my knowledge, there's no other animals on Earth who wantonly destroy their own life support systems. So that therefore, I think immediately puts things into perspective. We clearly are not the most intelligent being on the planet. But I think it's our awareness of that fact that might be the difference, and we can tip the balance the other way. So very quickly, we formed after I went for a jog one morning in South Wales in Pembrokeshire National Park, and I was up visiting friends with my wife, and this had been bothering me for quite some time, and I suppose I was becoming the pub bore to all my friends and family, etc., about moaning about all of these things and other environmental issues I could see all around me. And they said, well, actually no one said anything really, apart from they just sort of walk away and nod off. But it suddenly dawned on me that morning that, hey, none of this is going to change unless you are the change, unless you actually decide to do something about it yourself. So I'd already been doing, litter picks and things for years. But I suddenly realized that this was a bigger problem, and perhaps there was an opportunity to do something, on a larger scale and hopefully do it full time. So that's how it started. So I ran back to the hotel, campsite, I should say, and announced to my good lady wife that I was leaving my reasonably well-paid professional job, and I was going to buy a boat and start picking up plastic off difficult to reach locations around the coast. And I suppose it's the reason why I married her. But she said, "Okay, that sounds great." So that was the first hurdle out of the way, relatively simply. So there we go. That's basically literally what happened that morning in Pembrokeshire. So from there, I had a lot of experience in managing outdoor events prior to my sort of corporate role, and I realized that to do the sort of thing we wanted to do, we just had to get hands-on and really practical about it. So a boat was the very obvious solution, because you were not going to have to jump through some of the hoops you would if you're approaching these problems by land, with land ownership and access rights and all the rest of it. So my theory was, if we sort of arrived on the beach unannounced early in the morning with a sort of landing craft vessel, all a bit clandestine, almost Royal Marine style, if you like, we rush off the bow door with litter pickers, to the teeth with litter pickers and bags, then by the time anyone was going to rumble us, if you like, we'd be gone, and the job would be done. And so that's the approach we took, and we sort of thought, right, let's seek forgiveness afterwards, and on the basis that, who's really going to mind anyone clearing up their beach. So that worked. It really did work straight away. So I put the boat on a credit card. We got in the boat and started doing the job, and luckily timing was good. Blue Planet was around about at the same time, and I tried this 2 years prior to that and got some sort of raised eyebrows and scratchy head movements. But that was the catalyst. That was the big wake-up call for so many folk, and it's been a huge bonus for many organizations, our own included, that global awareness was made possible, through that programming. So we got the boat, then we had to work out, this is, by the way, I forgot to do my caveats at the beginning, so I must say that all my ramblings throughout this talk are my own views and experience. They're not necessarily shared by my sponsors and partners, and I think it's a good idea to set the bar relatively low at this stage, so that we're reasonably guaranteed of some success out of this. So genuinely, I'm not an expert. I'm I could say a very well-read, hands-on kind of person who likes to get things done. So all of what I'm talking about is just my own personal opinion based on the experiences that I've had. So we got the boat, and I said that because my business plan was that there wasn't a business plan, and I'm sure some of the entrepreneurs amongst you and business managers and owners will be thinking that's obviously crazy, and I do agree with you. However, from other previous experience of having a go at a few things in life, I've also realised that you just have to take the step. And who's written a business plan out there that's actually panned out exactly the way you wrote it down on the back of a fag packet or whatever it was, spending days and years perhaps formulating it? It just never pans out like you think it's going to. Often it's better. So the theory was, we'll just get cracking with this and we'll see where it takes us. So the boat, which isn't here, it's down on the harbour pontoon, which is where we basically operate it from most commonly. We do have a small one here, actually. I'll walk you around. So whilst I'm walking there, I can show you, and I hope you can see all of this. This is the fruits of our labours, I suppose you could say. So this is our depot at a farm in South Devon, and we bring everything back here that we recover for sorting and sort of organisation into what can be recycled, what needs to go to waste to energy, and unfortunately also what will ultimately end up in a hole in the ground because there just isn't a process, or it's economically unviable to do anything else with it. So there was an awful lot of it here. We've had several 7-ton truckloads prior to this taken away by our recycling partners. But as you can see, we're talking about large volumes of material here, and it just keeps on coming. So here's an example of one of the boats that we use. So this is a Dutch manufacturer called Wally. They make plastic, roto-molded, recyclable boats, and they're very hard-wearing, very utilitarian, and they're fantastic for what we do. So this is the smaller one that we use as a sort of safety and support boat. Our other one's got a bow door, which makes it eminently suitable for the job we do. We can ram it up onto beaches. We've got a prop guard so we don't get snagged up in rocks and all the rest of it. And this is what makes the work that we do possible, using these vessels. And the other thing that you can clearly see on here is our business model now. So we realized that the boats were very visible and the activity was attracting some interest and attention. So we basically thought, okay, we might be able to run a sponsorship model here. So we went out and approached organizations and businesses and said, would you like to support us in the work that we're doing and be part of it? And fortunately, the timing was good and the appetite was there for this kind of thing. So straight off the bat, Coastal Recycling joined us as our founding partner, and that was critical because they agreed to cover the costs of the vessel, which was eating a hole into my credit card, which was an enormously good start. But crucially, perhaps even more importantly, they also agreed to be our waste management partner. So this is the critical problem that lots of organizations face that do this sort of thing, is what do you do with the material you're recovering? And as you can see, we're not talking about a used Tesco bag full of litter off the back of a beach. We're talking about larger quantities of material that's considered hazardous waste by most. So the Coastal Recycling team, who incidentally are now a entirely employee-owned business out of Exeter, are a critical partner to us and have been so since the beginning. Rockfish soon joined the party, as it were, and got on board, which was also critical. And this is really interesting because Rockfish, if you don't know, are a very successful and growing chain of sort of family-orientated quality seafood restaurants around the South Devon, Dorset coast. And needless to say, Rockfish purvey seafood. And as you can see from our yard, a lot of what we recover is commercial fisheries gear. Now, it's a complicated subject to get into, but it has to be talked about because it's one of the challenges we have as an organization. We're partnering with folk who perpetuate the catching of fish, bearing in mind, of course, that they only perpetuate the catching of fish because we perpetuate in loving fish and chips and buying it from them. So it's one of those sort of circular things that to change, the chain has to be broken somewhere. So that's an interesting one. So I suppose now's a good time to also introduce you to our latest publicity raising efforts. This is what probably looks like a big dog cage. I don't know how much you can see from where you are. Let's have a look.
Okay. You can see it pretty well, I think, Gary. Yeah.
Okay, great. So Well, this is a whale sculpture, and he's called, or she or it, whatever, it doesn't matter. It's called Whaley McWhaleface, and hopefully you can see that it's vaguely in the shape of a whale. He is missing his fluke because we've just had it at a show over the weekend, and we have to remove that for transport. So on my first outing, I put a big dent in the tail and knocked over a lamppost, I'm afraid, but I've spoken to the council about that. So here, the whale here has been a long time coming, and this was only made possible by some of our partners and sponsors as well. But basically now it's trailer mounted, and we're going to be able to take this to events and festivals and high footfall occasions where we can talk to folk about the issues, but probably more importantly about the solutions, because I think we hear an awful lot about the problems. We know what the problems are. We all know what our own problems are. It's the solutions that we're all interested in. And they're, I guess you could say, a little harder to come by, but not necessarily, because again, as Richard said at the beginning, the solutions are basically lie in the fact that we just have to do things. We have to get stuck in, and sitting around talking about things is kind of a waste of energy past a particular point. It's essential at the beginning, but you have to say after a certain point, an awful lot of waffling goes on and not a lot of action. And that's something, you know, if nothing else comes out of this, I think that might be the key kind of metric. So as mentioned, we recover plastic pollution. That's our primary aim as a environmental and social CIC. And I won't labor this, but for those of you who are limited for-profit organizations, I think it's worth mentioning that, as you will be well aware, there is other ways of doing business. And I think increasingly entrepreneurs and business owners and everything else have to think this carefully through, because I find that genuinely customers and people we interact with are looking for a point of difference that doesn't necessarily revolve around price and performance and everything else. They're looking for provenance. They're looking for true gut kind of feel on things. They're looking for the same in people and products and services. So whatever area of commerce you're involved in or endeavor, I think those are important things to consider. People are looking for brands and people that are genuine, and I think we really need to make sure that we address that point early on in whatever kind of planning that we're doing about our organizations, about our services, about whatever we think we might be doing. I think it's very important to take note of that point. Clearly, we're in a price-driven world. You know, life is not easy by any means, but there's also massive opportunity within that problem. And I think on a positive note, it's important to say that the whole environmental crisis, biodiversity loss, climate change, call it what you will, as serious as a problem as it is, there's also unbelievable opportunity within that problem to reset and recharge and head off in a better direction than we've been heading down. And we all know this needs to be done. But actually, if you embrace it in the right kind of way with an enormous amount of positivity and goodwill, I think the paybacks can be pretty rapid and significant. So there's massive opportunity within these problems. Okay, let's pause on that for a little bit. So I'd like to show you this as an example of how tiny, small things can add up to a pretty significant problem. So these here, a lot of you will recognize these if you're familiar with holidaying on the coast and things. These are crabbing lines. You know, who doesn't love a bit of crabbing? It's great fun. It's educational. It's, you know, it just kills a couple of hours on the foreshore on a quay in a nice little seaside town. And it's on the face of it, good, innocent fun. And, you know, and frankly, every kid should experience it, I suppose. However, the reality of that fun pastime is somewhat different when you see up close the amount of waste that it generates, and this should be considered a single-use plastic entity. So, you know, they're very cheap. They come in by the container load from the manufacturers overseas, and they're sold relatively affordably on quaysides all around the UK. And you'll all be familiar with these, you know, buckets and the crab catching nets and all the rest of it. Now, this stuff here wasn't recovered by us off the coast. That's an important point to make. We've collected this from our partners in Brixham, who run a fantastic recycling scheme for this material. Now they're working at two ends. They're trying to educate folk into considering doing something different that day, or if they're going to do it, to use different things. There are options. I mean, this is a slightly battered one, but here's a sustainable version of the same things we're seeing here. It's made of timber and twine, natural twine, which all rot away eventually. You can obviously do this with a stone or a piece of timber out of the woods and some old string. You genuinely can. Just takes a bit of planning and thought. But anyway, so the plastic stuff here, you've got major problems with this because recycling relies on raw material, the quality of the raw material. So here we've got mixtures of colors, which is a problem straight off the bat. We've got unknown plastics because this is such cheap mass-produced stuff. They don't even bother printing what plastic it is on it. So that presents a problem straight away. And then we have different types of plastics within the same product. So that again makes things eminently difficult. You've got all these nets have been removed from these metal framed crabbing lines here. This is a stash that's come back from one of the receptacles in Brixham that hasn't yet been sorted. So you can see the amount of labor involved in producing this separated material from the original items is huge. We're talking, teams of volunteers spending hours and hours, doing this. And to what avail is hard to know, because we're still seeking partners who can actually do something with this. Now, apart from making pretty bunting and repurposing it as something to raise awareness about the problem, the fact is this stuff isn't going anywhere soon, and it's likely, I hate to say, end up as fuel for energy from waste plants, which I can't hear your sharp intakes of breath, but I'm sure there were a few there. The alternative is simply landfill, which is a much less acceptable form of waste management, in my opinion. So there we go. There's some of the challenges we face. Now, onto a good news story. This is a kayak, a sit-on-top style kayak. It's a double. We use these very effectively to recover waste from the less accessible places that we go. So we often tow them behind our boat and we anchor off the coast, and then we use these to access all the little nooks and crannies where this stuff does tend to collect according to the prevailing winds and tides, etc. So this particular vessel here is made by an organization called Odyssey Innovation, based out of Cornwall. Rob Thompson is the founder, and he's been instrumental in producing what is now recognized as a genuine circular economic model for plastic end-of-life fishing nets and post-consumer waste. So we've got 8 of these now, and there's one of the older models, and they're fantastic. They're genuinely really good quality items. They're easily the equal of virgin plastic models. Now, the process is quite drawn out because we don't have the infrastructure in the UK as yet to do it all closer to home, but I think it needed to be done to prove the model. So the nets get collected from quays all around the UK. This includes ones that are put in by the fishing folk themselves. So end-of-life nets, which routinely used to be dumped because they're a big problem to bring ashore and get rid of. It was costing the fishers a lot of money, and the infrastructure wasn't there either. So regularly dumped at sea. Big trawl nets. I'm talking about huge pieces of plastic, which of course create all kinds of hazards in the ocean afterwards, including bycatch. They continue to fish basically once they've been dumped, which is an enormous problem, let alone the hazard to marine traffic and all the rest of it. So the nets are gathered, they're containerized and taken to Denmark, which admittedly is a bit of a stretch by truck. However, they're converted into the raw material for almost all plastic items, nurdles. They're turned into tiny little plastic beads, transported back to the UK and put into a roto-molding process, which produces these fine vessels. So I think this is an important point, because this is a circular system that's been a long time coming, because it wasn't a get-rich-quick scheme. This was obviously going to take a lot of time. There was going to be a lot of hurdles, a lot of resistance to this kind of model. And the boats are probably a little bit more expensive than their virgin plastic counterparts. However, you've got to ask yourself, surely it's got to be worth saving up for a couple more months, putting a few things on hold to get what is definitely a superior piece of kit with provenance, with a recycling scheme in place already for when they're end of life. And I think that's, you know, a really important point. That's where we need to be looking at circular systems. You have to think about everything from supply chain right through to end of life. You know, once someone's paid for a service or a product, is that the end of your responsibility? I would strongly argue that it isn't. You've brought that product to market, you've brought it, made it possible for someone to buy it. Your responsibility stretches way beyond the manufacturer and provision of the product or service. So there we go, the 360 kayaks, as we call them, or we call them sea wombles. And that goes over lots of people's heads because they're not old enough to have experienced the joys of wombles on TV. How are we going, Richard?
We're going good. We are. We've probably got another 10 minutes.
Okay, no worries. So let's have a look here. So we do a lot of interaction now. So of course, primary purpose is to recover plastic off the coast. Then of course, we can't be out every day, all day. It's impossible. The winds, tides and weather dictate everything that we do. So we do a lot of educational outreach. We go to schools. We do a lot of this kind of thing for younger groups from here via broadband. So we just beam it straight into their classrooms, onto their whiteboards, and their teachers, you know, interact with us really well, and we can get a lot done that way. But we do take these into schools. And just a quick rake through, this has been separated from the sort of normal bag of beach clean waste, which can look pretty grim when it arrives. It's obviously a mixture of all kinds of things. You can see straight away that it's not a glamorous job, that's for sure. However, you know, the rewards are huge. But this is a typical kind of beach clean bag that we've brought back that hasn't been sorted. And we separate some items that will be of particular interest, because you've got to spark interest. You've got to, you know, kind of get there, get them to listen in. So things we find hundreds of all the time. Lighters. We find hundreds, if not thousands, of shotgun cartridges. We find increasingly vapes. And again, it's not just the fisheries by any means. All of us at some time, myself definitely included, have lost recreational fun stuff, shoes, balls, frisbees, and all the rest of it. So it just goes to show that we all have a responsibility, obviously, about this problem. But there's all kinds of interesting and fun stuff in these boxes, including things like this, which are always quite surprising. Seven Oceans emergency drinking water, which would have come out of a life raft, one of those sort of orange life rafts that you would leap into should your vessel sink. This is always a good one. So hopefully some of you out there will be able to see that, or all of you will be able to see it. And remember this bottle. This is a Corona pop bottle or a Dandelion and Burdock bottle. And it's of interest because on the top you may be able to make out there's a bottle deposit of 2.5p on this item here. And do you remember when it used to be very simple? You'd run around as a kid, backing up your pocket money by finding these and other things that had bottle return deposits on them, take them to the sweet shop and trade them in for blackjacks and fruit salads and whatever else you could get your hands on. And it was just a genius circular system. So it's an example of how we've regressed from the very obvious and sensible thinking of a system that's circular and where the raw material is valued and reused. And with the onset of plastics, it's so cheap, so utilitarian, so easy to produce, and what have you, that this was disregarded. Of course, now we know all this, you'd think it would be very simple to adopt a return deposit scheme on plastic and on other items. But of course, no, it's much more difficult because it's wrapped up in politics and all the rest of it. So we do talk about that sort of thing at length. The kids get it straight away, we all get it straight away, but of course it's never as simple on the ground, even if it should be. So I want to mention, of course, we've all got limited time. I think it's important that we spend that time, you know, as cleverly as we can, in the sense that we need to obviously educate ourselves. And whilst, as Richard said, a lot of this can be, frankly, quite depressing. It really can. If you look at the huge problems right in the eye, it is mind-bogglingly, you know, it's too big a problem for us to solve on the face of it. However, if you break it all down into small steps, and that's the crux of what I've trying to have been saying, I suppose, is that this is all about making the right calls at the right time to the best of your ability. And your ability improves, obviously, the more you put into educating yourself about how we could be doing things. And there's some just wonderful reading out there, some good balanced arguments either side. I think if I was to recommend one book, if you were going to a desert island and have to take one, it would be this one, because it presents solutions. It outlines the issues, but it immediately presents fantastic, achievable, scalable solutions. So that's a really good one. Okay, what else do we have here that might surprise you? So, innocent looking dog balls. We find hundreds of them because we're in a beachy sort of leisure area. Everyone loves chucking a ball in the sea for their dog. Who doesn't? We do too. But they lose, I don't know, 20% of them. And everybody thinks, oh, it's only a tennis ball, that's no problem. But here's, let's just have a quick look. Here's a tennis ball that's degrading. So you've got like a rubber ball inside, which isn't necessarily that big a problem. There's a naked one there. But when you actually have a closer look at the tennis ball wrap, if you like, I don't know how macro this goes, but can you see those tiny filaments of plastic?
And they're,
yeah, sorry, maybe it's not focusing, but they're
no, you can see it, yeah.
Yeah, sure. So my fingers there's tiny filaments of plastic, and that's, as you probably all know, the issue with plastics degrading. They go from big to small to tiny to micro to nano, but they don't go away. So they're in our food web, they're in the air, we breathe every day, and they're just part of the human system now. So hang on, let me think of how do we.
I wonder if we can maybe ask a few questions, Gary.
Yes, of course.
Come to the end of your time. I don't know if anyone else has got a question they'd like to ask Gary before he has to shoot off. He's not going to be able to be in the breakout rooms because he's got a lot of work to do, as you can see. So if you've got a question, just raise your hand. For my part, I'm looking at all of this stuff and I'm thinking, you've been doing this for 5 years, you say?
Yes.
What do you notice when you go out, each time you go out? Is there less to do or more to do, or do you notice the difference?
Yes, in some locations where we're able to get regularly, there's a spectacular improvement in the build-up of plastics, but that's only because we're on top of it and we're there regularly. If we were to abandon a couple of these places for a year or so, I dare say it would be as bad as it was at the beginning, and we could go to coves and fill up the whole boat with 500 kilos of plastic, easily. So whilst it is improving because of not just, I mean, we're one of a multitude of organizations that, fewer as well resourced as we are. However, there's loads of groups, as you all know, as Richard mentioned at the beginning, doing unbelievable work to tidy up their own community and their own environment.
So in terms of, Catherine's got her hand up.
If that's okay.
Of course,
that was
please.
Very interesting, that response. Question for you, Gary, please.
Sure.
So you're doing loads of positive influence within communities in South Hams and probably South Wales as well, and places like that. But have you started trying to influence the manufacturers and the companies responsible for this? Because you have quite a big following, and I just wondered if you'd been tapping into suggesting that they innovate differently.
Yes, to a point we have. I mean, it's quite challenging in the sense that, as you all know, you have to kind of focus on one thing if you want to become reasonably good at it. So what we've been finding is when we set out, we had to sort of gather a body of evidence. So we just basically focused on clearing the mess up, and then bringing the stuff back here was really important because we were gathering a body of evidence to then show to journalists and everything else. So we've had a lot of journalistic interest in all of this and everything else, and we've been trying to highlight it as an issue for all kinds of different organizations and the fisheries and everything else. However, we have to be realistic about the level at which we punch at, and that's not being unambitious. It's just that we can feed some data and some images and things into the system, and hopefully people like Surface Gate Sewage and MSC and the bigger bodies can use it effectively at political level to influence some change. Having said that, to be honest, that's kind of crap. That's a crap answer. Our next focus is absolutely on using the influence we have now and the body of evidence that we've collected to actually punch a bit harder, not below the belt necessarily, but closer to the belt, because this is becoming an infuriating issue that's not going away. I don't want to be doing this in 5-10 years time, and nor does anyone else. This just shouldn't be a problem that we have to tackle. There's bigger things that we should be looking at. So yeah, basically scrap what I said at the beginning. We need to get a bit more vociferous and a bit more aggressive about it.
Right, understood. Thank you.
Manuel.
Hi, Gary. Thanks for the presentation. A quick question. If you were to, and I love this, I had no insight around the work you were doing, and it's a lot. I've been taking a lot of notes. If you were to continue doing this work and even more of a greater impact, and if you were to have like a magic wand, and tomorrow morning you get up and you actually get something that allows you to even gain even more traction specifically, I don't know what it would be, funding or a partnership or anything specifically, what would that be?
I think it would have nothing to do with funding for us or anything like that. It's sort of, it would be about if we could wake up tomorrow morning and collectively there was this common sense of community globally. And I use the word, community. This was supposed to be about community. I've, typically gone off track. This was supposed to be, the reason why this has worked is because we focused at a community level. And that wasn't on purpose. That was by accident, because we had a slightly broader remit. We thought, right, South Wales coast, Southwest Peninsula, and we're talking hundreds of miles of coast there. Now that seemed like an area we could manage. It quickly became apparent that was physically impossible, logistically impossible, but perhaps more importantly, it was because it's very difficult to engage with the community if you're not part of it. So you either need change makers on the ground who are part of the community, or you need to be active within your community. And by community, I'm talking about not just about the place you live or work, which of course are communities. I'm talking about the wider community of whoever you interact with. So wherever you have a sphere of influence, you have obviously a responsibility to try and use your influence positively. So if we were to wake up tomorrow morning and the world to be a better place, as it were, it would just be, suddenly we'd all realize that we're all in this together, that we're all interconnected, that we're all absolutely dependent on each other's actions and inaction. That would be a good thing to wake up to, wouldn't it?
Good sign up for that. Now, has anyone else got a final question before we move into our breakout rooms? I know that Gary can't stick with us forever, so Emma, go on.
Just a tiny one. Thank you so much for all of that. It was so fascinating. I hope you can get in every school in the country. It's just, going to be so vital. But I just wondered, are you considering finding a vegan restaurant to partner with, considering the challenges with working with rockfish?
Yes, interesting points. Now, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Fishing can be done. Well, a lot of people argue it can't be done sustainably, or if it is, fish then becomes elitist and unavailable to those on lesser budgets. That's probably true. But fishing is not going to go away. I know you could argue that about anything. It would go away if we stopped buying fish. Of course it would. But in view of the fact that a significant proportion of the human population relies on protein from the oceans, etc., and we feed fish from fish farms on krill from the Antarctic and all the rest of it. It's a massive, challenging conversation. I think at the moment, at least, we're better off working with those who are involved in this activity, which is definitely showing no signs of abating. We're better off working with and helping inform and helping them to adopt better practices and better behaviors amongst the crews, etc., than we are turning our back on them and kind of ignoring the problem. So yeah, maybe I'm sitting on the fence a little bit with that, but that's how I feel about it at the moment.
Okay, yeah, I can see the logic.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Gary, for taking the time today and for showing us around the yard and for taking the risk with the technology as well. Massively appreciate you doing this for us. And I should say, before Gary goes, we are, for those of you who are in or around Exeter, We are aiming to head out to the yard where Gary is now on the 11th of July and go and help him out for a few hours. We'll learn a bit more about the work that Gary does, and you're going to look after us, and hopefully we can sort out some bits and pieces while we're there, Gary.
Yes, absolutely. You'd be really, really welcome. We have a great time. We do groups here regularly. And we also won't just stay here. We'll go down to the coast to a beautiful beach where there's a particular microplastic problem. So, you will get very hands-on with the issues, and it's just a nice way to spend a day and connect.
Thanks, Gary. Massively appreciated. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. Best of luck with all your endeavours and whatever you're getting up to out there, and remember to try and do the right thing where you can.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Gary.
Bye, guys. Thank you.